Welcome everybody to our new coffee break webinar. Today we're going to talk about the CLP revision, especially when it comes to the physical label requirements. I'm going to take my presentation. So today we're going to talk about the physical label, the new rules, but also the already existing rules of the physical label according to CLP. We're going to talk about the content of the label, so what should be on the label, the layout of the label and the rules on that. A couple of exemptions which are there. We're also going to talk about tactile warning and child-resistant fasting. While they're actually not part of the physical label, they do belong to the product itself. So we're also going to talk about that. Something about label updates and also some ideas on guidance that we think should be available from ECHA. I'm going to use two pictograms during this, or two symbols during this presentation. The one which regards to webinar. So if you see this pop up somewhere for a specific subject, this means that we are going to do a webinar in the future on this. The other one is the question mark, in which if you see this pop up everywhere, anywhere on any subject, this means that we think more guidance on this aspect is needed. We will discuss that as well in the end. So let's start. The content of the label, the information that should be on the label. Actually, nothing much changed there. The information that should be on the label should still be on the label, so there is no real new thing there. There are a couple, and in fact there are three aspects which have a little bit of a change there, and we're going to talk about them separately. Let's first start with the supplier. In the new CLP revision, it is clearly stated that products from outside of the EU also need to have an EU supplier responsible for all CLP aspects. Meaning that in addition to the supplier of the product, for instance, a product from the UK, which is sold on the European market, should have a European supplier, not only responsible for everything that has to do with CLP, so PCN notification, labeling, classification, but also that EU supplier it should be mentioned on the label. So that means that there could be one, perhaps even two, even three different suppliers on a product in the future. We sure think that some guidance is needed here when it comes to the responsibilities of that specific EU supplier, but also on how many addresses or suppliers or importers or manufacturers should be on the label. So we hope that guidance will follow on this aspect. Then the contains, in which specific ingredients are mentioned. If there are that specific ingredients need to be mentioned where they contribute to a specific hazard class. The ingredients that need to be mentioned there, the list of hazard classes they contribute to has been expanded with these additional hazard classes. And these are actually the new ones that have been implemented a while ago in CLP. Also on this one, we think that some guidance is needed as the list of hazard classes is growing. We think guidance is also needed on a specific hierarchy of ingredients to be mentioned in the contains. Should we mention the carcinogens or should we mention the endocrine disrupting materials, for instance? But we'll come back to this discussion somewhat later on. And then a requirement from the CLP revision, which states that label requirements from other Union acts should be placed on the CLP label as well. So additionally to the CLP requirements. In this case, for instance, detergent declaration should, as it's stated at the moment, should also be mentioned on the CLP label with the new requirements for the CLP label also being applicable. I think we also need some guidance here, and we will come to this discussion somewhat later after we've talked about what the requirements for the physical label are. Well, and then I think the most important aspect, the physical label itself. They have introduced some changes to the requirements on this label, mainly because of readability. They really want to have the label more readable, more clear, less room for, let's say, not being able to find the information, etc. And that is why they have included a couple of new aspects to the label itself. There are, I think, 5, 6 of them. They're very clear, but they have a lot of practical implications. We will go through all of them. Deadline is also stated here, and let's start with the first one. It's a very easy one. The information needs to be on a white background with black text. Pretty easy, but I think practically it has a big impact. No red on black background, no white text on a red background or whatever, white with black text. Some discussion, but we'll come to that later. Next to the minimum size for the pictograms and the minimum size for labeling, so for the label size, they now also have set minimal font sizes, and it is to the X height in millimeters. It's a little bit of a strange parameter, but it actually comes down to the 1.2 millimeter X height is about a font size 7 for Arial in Word. So if we're looking at the 200 milliliter label that I just showed, this means that the text is created in font size 7 in Word. This is the text which this table was already known. The dimensions for the label were there, the dimensions for the pictogram were there, and it is now expanded with the dimensions for the font size. We also need to take into account the distance between two lines, which should be at least 100% of the font size. So related to the font size, the spacing should be done correctly, so that all, again, readability is the reason why they do this. Then we have the aspect that one single font is needed for the label without serifs. So it does not only say something about the font size and the distance between two lines, but it also says something about what kind of fonts may be used. Well, above we see the fonts with serifs, as they are called. And beneath we see a couple of fonts, different fonts without the serifs. So above what we call the more elegant fonts, and below we have the fonts which, according to the legislators, are more easy to read. So the elegant ones, the ones with the serifs, are no longer allowed, and we need to use the ones without the serifs. Well, these are 4 different aspects which are changed, which have been changed, which we need to implement, and this has the simple practical implication that when looking at the minimum size, minimum label size, and the information that we need to put on there, that the minimum label size is not enough anymore to get all the information on the label itself. In this case, you can see the minimum label size for a 200 ml packaging, and you can see that the information that needs to be on there in the size with the spacing, etc., it is not enough to get all the information on. And then the exemptions. There are a couple of exemptions for labeling, smaller packagings or odd-shaped packaging. We already had some requirements to the less than 125 ml packaging, and we had some exemptions for 10 milliliter for research and development products. But now, with the new revision, these 10 smaller than 10 ml packagings are also allowed in certain cases for consumer products. So there is a new rule on this, but we will come back to that with a new webinar. Some rules for bulk products without packaging, of course, and some exemptions from labeling for instance, ammunition. In case of questions on these specifics, specifically the last two, if there are questions, just send them over. These are not that common, so we are not going to discuss that in this presentation. Then tactile warning and child-resistant fastening. They are part of the packaging, not really of the physical label, but they should be on the packaging, so that's why we also brought them up here. Actually, nothing has changed yet there. The hazard classes or the hazard criteria for child-resistant fastening and also for tactile warning are still the same as they were. We do expect a change here, but it's not. It was not in this revision yet, but we do expect that endocrine disrupting substances, or at least the hazard criteria for endocrine disrupting, will also be added to this, especially for the tactile warning. And we also know that in this revision, a study has been requested for checking if the H318, so that's severe eye damage, would also need child-resistant fastening. Still not there, but perhaps in the future it will be there as well. And then something what in the current legislation is, let's say, a little bit fuzzy, when to update labels. At the moment it states as soon as possible. In the new revision, timelines have been added to these specific as soon as possible lines. So in case a hazard class is added, or it is a more severe classification, or new EUH phrases are added, the label needs to be updated no later than 6 months after that specific classification has been done. And all other aspects for label changes need to be done no later than 18 months after deciding it should be done. There is one exemption, and that is the exemption if there is a specific classification change due to a Annex 6, which is mandatory classification change. Then the dates set in that specific update of the Annex 6 should be used. So the deadlines in that specific update should be used, and the 6 and 18 months are not relevant. Then guidance. As you saw, there were a couple of question marks throughout the presentation. I've come to combine them all in this specific sheet. Let's start with the white background. We hope that some guidance will be available in the near future, especially, for instance, on recycled paper bags or whatever. Do we also need to put a white background on that, or do we still are we still allowed to use the brown background as they are recycled bags? But also when it comes to the white background and the minimum label size, as we saw for the 200 ml, especially with very, let's say, non-severe classifications. Are we in the future allowed Well, let's an example. We have a product which is classified has a EUH 208 phrase. In this specific instance for D-limonene, this would be relative the minimum label requirement. So both in size, pictograms not needed, information that is on there, and also the sizing of the fonts. This is a pretty big white background on a 200 ml packaging. And the question is this what we need to do? And we still have some doubts on the logo, but we will see that in a minute. Or are we allowed to get that specific white background somewhat smaller? Or do we really need to have such a big white background just for this one phrase? We hope that some guidance will be applicable and hopefully very, very soon. Second one is the contains. We already discussed that, the ingredients that need to be mentioned. We also know that in the current legislation, this can be sorted out by mentioning only 4 ingredients. But which one? If there are, let's say, 8 or 12 ingredients that need to be mentioned, which ingredients are we going to mention? Are those the ones for the carcinogenic aspects, or for the endocrine disrupting, or for the sensitizing aspects, or is that up to the one creating the label? We hope to see some guidance there. The supplemental hazard information. Do we really need to put in the detergent declaration or biocidal information in that specific CLP label, including the black text on white background, including the spacing between the spacing, including the phrase, the fonts and the font sizes, etc. Or is it also allowed to put it somewhere else on the packaging? Hopefully, also very shortly, some guidance will be applicable or available on this aspect. Then the EU supplier, we already talked about that. How are we going to deal with this EU supplier? How many addresses can we put on the label? How far do the responsibilities for that specific EU supplier go? Is it only CLP, or is it also what happens when something goes wrong? Who's responsible? Is the EU supplier responsible for, I don't know, getting products off of the market, or helping with solutions, etc.? Does such a EU supplier need to check every label aspect for every label product? How are we going to deal with this? This is really an aspect that hopefully the guidance will be there from ECHA. We are looking into that, how that works. We are also looking into the possibility of being EU suppliers for our non-EU customers, so that we can provide them with the help to at least bring the products on the market, still on the market in the EU. But we still need to find out how responsibilities are dealt with in case of CLP. So hopefully to be continued. And then one last additional aspect: is it still allowed to have a company logo on the CLP label? And is it allowed to have that in color? Because it should be white background, black labeling. And as you saw with our logo, for instance, it's green with white fonts and white text. So is that still allowed? And we are not sure about that. So hopefully also there some guidance will be applicable in the future. So that, I think, sums up everything that has to do with the physical label itself. Of course, there are way more things in this specific CLP revision. That's also what we're coming back to in our next webinar, because our next webinar will be on the fold-out label, which is a solution that now is available for all products, not only for low volume packaging, but for all products. So we will have the next webinar on this specific item in which we will elaborate on the requirements there, but also the practical downsides, etc. And of course, also in the future, the 125 ml packaging rules and the smaller than 10 ml packaging rules, etc. And more to follow there. In case of questions, please do let us know. These are our credentials. We were happy to help you in case there are questions. Thank you for listening and see you next time.